G'day car lovers, welcome to Built Right with AJ. Thank you so much for tuning in, really, it means a great deal to me. I hope you enjoy the intro montage too. There's another one coming soon with my other car collection, the ones that go fast. So, I wanted to just put this out there before we get too far into it. This is a safe place for car tragics like you and I. So the deal is, I will never tell you you've got too many projects if you don't tell me. See unfair? Cool, let's crack on. So pull up a stool, grab a beer if you're that way inclined, cup of tea, cup of coffee, whatever you're drinking. This is the show I wish existed when I was first getting into all of this, back when I was knee deep, doing the wrong mods on the wrong vehicle for the wrong reasons, and no one was leveling with me. Episode 0, Part A, this is the one where I tell you a bit about who I am, where the show came from, and why I'm the bloke sitting in front of you right now. Part B comes after this. That's the one where I'll tell you exactly what we're going to do every week. So if you've got half an hour to spare and you want to know whether this is the show for you, please stick around. So a bit about me before we get into anything engineering. I'm AJ. I live in Toowoomba here with my family. I'm married to Rochelle. I've been told a number of times now that I'm punching well over my weight, so that's good news. 3 awesome boys, Cooper who's 19, Clayton's 15, and Jacob who's 12. More on them in a little bit. We've got a small farm just out of town, 70 acres on undulating pastures, 7 hand-raised cows, and 2 staffies. That's pretty much my family. So a bit more about me. I'm a car bloke, across the spectrum, and as it turns out, on the spectrum, but more on that later too. And when I say car bloke, I mean it. I owned a Lada Niva when I was a younger and naiver man. A couple of Nissan Patrols, a GQ and a GU, both petrol. Honestly, I didn't have a lot of friends at the servo before I owned Nissan Patrols, but I certainly made some afterwards. A couple of Discos, a Disco TD5 and then a Disco 3, and the current rig's a 2020 Amarok. It's slowly been getting set up over the last 5 years. So there's been performance cars in there too. A Forester XT that I've had coming up for nearly 21 years this year. It's lived many lives. Currently it's serving as a backroad blaster. A couple of Honda Preludes, an old school Galant VR4, an older Ford Capri that I stuck an FJ20 into, a couple of i30Ns, a Porsche Boxster S, a BRZ, and finally, last year I got my dream car, which is a manual 911 C4S. So pretty happy about that. It's definitely way too fancy for me, but I do enjoy driving it a lot. A few others too, you can see more of them in future episodes. From the full drive side though, the Niva's where it all started and the Amarok's where it's at now. And everything in between is part of how I learned what I'm about to spend the rest of the show talking about. I've also got a 1978 Mercedes 450 SE that's been a long build, like a very long build. I think we're coming up to 15 years. But don't remind my wife, she'll remind me. This is one of the projects that we don't talk about in mixed company. That one in particular is mine. I turned 50 last year. I'm still figuring myself out, and about half the time, I think I've got it right. Anyone who tells you that they've got it all worked out by 50 is either lying or they're just content being discontent. Probably a bit of both, I don't know. The long and short of it is, I finished up with the army at the start of last year. It's spent a fair bit of time trying to figure out who I was going to be out of uniform and what I could do to be useful in this world. It's still a work in progress, but there has been progress, and that's the important thing. More on that in a tick too. So that's me. Now let me tell you a bit about the bloke who's one of the biggest reasons any of this exists and what we hope to do in his honour. Willie is my father-in-law, Rochelle's dad. We lost him in January this year to pancreatic cancer. It hit him hard, and it took him away from us really fast. 6 weeks from diagnosis to passing. 6 weeks. We're all still in shock. We lost a bloody good man very quickly. And a lot of the time, it still doesn't feel real. Willie was the Boilermaker fabricator. He spent nearly 35 years at the Bega cheese factory. He could see things differently to everyone else. You know, if I had a problem, like a technical problem, something I couldn't quite get my head around, I'd just call him up. Maybe just talk it through. And he'd see it in a way that I couldn't, and then explain it in a way that made complete sense. He was my resource, my sounding board. The bloke I called when I was stuck. And I miss being able to pick up the phone and call him. More than I expected, actually. More than I can really explain to you. And when he got sick, I did what I always do when I face a problem. I applied the engineering brain. You know, looked for options, looked at different solutions. Tried to understand the problem better. As an engineer, I'd never faced a problem I couldn't fix. And the man who'd always helped me with even the hardest of problems, he was the one suffering from the one I couldn't solve. And it seemed that this cancer had me beat on every corner. And that's a hard thing to sit with. You know, it was shit. And some days it still is. But you know, life has to go on. And Willie was a pragmatic bloke. You know, be sad for a while, but you've got to keep going. So Ask Willie, the AI intake on the team's website, it's a tribute to him. Maybe a bit of therapy for me too. a way of not having to let him go completely. And the premise is pretty simple. You ask him a question you don't quite understand, or you're just not getting your head around, and he'll explain it in a way that he used to do for me, plainly and with patience, and a bit of a sense of humour. He's smart enough to know what you actually need, and he also doesn't mind having a chat about Holland or Bathurst, or some of the beautiful places around Australia to visit, and one thing very specific and actually useful to me, how to weld. Even if you just want to shoot the breeze with another car guy, he's up for that too. 10% of every engineering engagement fee goes to Pankind Australia. They help support funding for pancreatic cancer research. Because from diagnosis to passing, 6 weeks, they told me one thing. There's just not enough research into early detection, and we want to help change that. And if the show does well and the business does well, that research gets more funding. And then I get to tick that being useful in the world box, hopefully. And that's got to be a good thing. So that was Willie. But here's the thing. Willie was just one piece of what was happening for me around that same window. Life can serve you up shit sandwiches sometimes. And for me, the last 18 months or so, it served a few of them, stacked up on top of each other. At the start of last year, after 16 years in the uniform, it was suddenly gone. Walked out of the gate of defence with a thanks for your service and a haircut that hadn't changed much in a decade and a half. My identity, the structure, my daily purpose, all of that's wired into the uniform. You take the uniform off and a fair bit of who you thought you were comes off with it. But more of that in the next bit. So the same year I turned 50, and I'd been pretending that wasn't going to happen for at least another 3 years. And 50 is not just a number, it's a moment. It's a moment when you realise you have to stop telling yourself your best physical years are in front of you. Because realistically they're not. They're somewhere in that rearview mirror. And the work now is to age well, not to try to keep fighting it. Cooper, well, he turned 19 and walked out the door on his own army adventure. I mean, it's a great decision and I'm proud of him for doing it, but it's still a son out of the house. And he's the first one to go. I mean, you can know it's coming for years and it still hits when it lands. And then losing Willie in January this year. And underneath all of that, and this is the bit I'm really only naming out loud now, I've been looking after myself last for a long time. My training had dropped off, the sleep had gone to hell. The bloke I used to be, fit and routine driven, had been getting quieter and quieter for a while. And when the rest started piling up, that bloke wasn't really there to pick up the slack. And that's the stack. Anyone listening who's had a similar window, a fair few of you would have, you know what I mean. It's not just the one thing, it's the way they overlap at times. Like I said in the pile-up, after 16 years in uniform and suddenly out, I wanted to come back to that because I reckon a lot of you will know how it feels, even if you've never worn the uniform. It could be a uniform, it could be a job, it could be a long relationship or a role you've held for years. It's the same shape of thing. 16 years in any structured organisation, it does something to you. The army gives you routine, hierarchy, a shared mission, a clear definition of what you're in for on any given day. You wake up knowing what's expected, you go to bed knowing what tomorrow looks like. You belong to something bigger than yourself. When you take that uniform off and you walk out the gate, nothing comes with you. The routine's gone, the structure's gone. The bloke standing next to you in the morning brief is gone, and nobody's there to tell you what you're in for tomorrow. That hit me harder than I expected. Actually, about 1 in 4 Australian veterans say the same thing, losing identity or purpose after leaving defence. It's a recognised thing, not just a me thing, but knowing it's common, it doesn't make it feel any less yours when it's happening. What happened in my case, and this might be familiar to anyone who's listening, who's been through a transition like this, whether it's in or out of uniform, it was the quiet. There was too much quiet. And my brain, left alone in too much quiet, does things where it runs the same circuit over and over. The technical word for it's rumination. The non-technical word is you wear a track down in your head. Once that track's worn in, depression can follow. Not the kind people imagine, not the weeping in a corner. The kind just sits there. You're low on fuel. It's hard to get started. It's hard to care about anything. And anxiety came along for the ride. I reckon anxiety for me is just that same loss of identity and defined purpose, dressed up in a different way. When you don't know what you're in for, what you're up for, what you stand for, every choice feels like it might be the wrong one. And that's exhausting in a way that's hard to describe if you haven't had it. Here's the bit I want anyone listening to hear properly. None of this means there's something wrong with you. It means a structured life ended and the next one just hasn't started yet. And that's the gap. Some people walk through it fast. Some people get stuck. I got stuck for a bit. But if you're in that gap right now, recently left a uniform, a job, a relationship, anything that gave you the shape of your day and your identity, that's not weakness. That's the cost of having belonged to something. The next thing exists, you just haven't found it yet. The other thing that came up through that quiet period, I finally got around to putting a name on something I'd been carrying my whole life without acknowledging. ADHD, diagnosed as an adult last year. Honestly, a relief, a massive relief. The kind where you look back at 49 years of you and suddenly all the things that never quite make sense start making complete sense. The hyper-focus when it's something I love, like anything with wheels, ask the family. The trouble starting things I don't love. The multiple processing tracks running at once. Useful when you're engineering, less useful when you're trying to fall asleep. The bit where I just don't care what people think of me, apparently that's an ADHD thing too, conveniently. I was afraid to name it for years, worried it'd mean I was broken, worried someone could write me off. The relief when I finally let myself name it was, well, yeah, it was big. Every cloud has a silver lining though, and the silver lining of getting the diagnosis at 49 instead of 9 is that I'd already done the hard yards without knowing what I was working with. Managed to get the honours degree, managed to fulfil 16 years in the army, starting an engineering practice, a family. All of that happened without the name. Once I had the name, I had access to resources I didn't even know existed. And I reckon without all that piling up at once, without the quiet period giving me the room to actually look at it, I probably wouldn't have had the impetus to do what I've done with teams and Ask Willy, and personally. Sometimes the worst windows turn out to be where the next best thing starts. Here's the bit I want to be really open and honest about. Neurodivergence isn't a disability, or, and this matters, it's not only a disability. Some days my brain runs at 15 layers at one time, and I reckon it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. But then there are other days when I can't string a sentence together. Both true, same brain, different outputs. I've got an honours degree in mechanical engineering. I run an engineering practice. I do work that has real consequences for real families. If neurodivergence was only a disability, none of that would happen. But, and this is the bit some people skip when they want to then call it a superpower, there are absolutely days when it gets in the way. So I built around it. Which brings me to a thing that some of you may have wondered anyway. The way the show gets made. Well, yeah, this is a digital avatar of me, and it does a lot of the heavy lifting. It's trained on me, my voice, my way of saying things, my mannerisms. On a good day, it lets me make myself look better than the bloke who's actually at the desk in a hoodie at midnight. On a not so good day, it lets me show up at all. The hard days don't get to stop this show from happening. That's the tech doing what the tech's designed to do. Make it easier to keep going when it gets harder to keep going. I'm telling you this because I'd rather you know than wonder. And because anyone listening that's in a hole right now, recently left a structured life, recently lost someone, recently put a name on something that you've been carrying for years, you're not alone. Now, I'm not going to be able to fix you, but I'm happy to show you that someone else has been there and still in some ways is. But the work can continue anyway. It's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to say it out loud. Anyone can find themselves in a hole. And this work, the cars, my family, the show, all of it, it's part of how I climb out of mine. So that was the heavy stuff. Now, let me tell you what's been keeping me going, because the back from the darkness piece, it's not just a one-day thing, it's a daily thing. And for me, it's been a few very specific things, most of which I didn't even pick on purpose. Life just put them in front of me. The first one is my routine. It's a different drum beat to the army, but it's a drum beat nonetheless. The army gave me daily certainty. Wake up, brief, train, eat, work, sleep, repeat. When that goes, you don't realise how much it was holding you up until it's not there anymore. So you've got to build a new one. Mine started up in the form of a 4:15 alarm in the morning. That alarm's for Jacob, my youngest. He's 12. He swims at squad level, which means early starts at the pool 3 or 4 mornings a week, before school starts. Some days when that blanket of depression feels like it won't let me get up, the responsibility I have to take Jacob to the pool is what lifts me out of bed. So yeah, his routine has helped me. He probably doesn't even realise that, but one day I'll tell him. And I'll be honest about the trade. I gave up a lot of my own physical training to be there for the boys. The bloke I used to be at the gym every day, the bloke that trained as a priority, well, it's no longer the priority. He had to take a back seat. And I think that trade is more than fair. The boys are an age where my time is the most valuable thing I can give them. That's what they want from me. The training time will come back when they don't need me to drive them anywhere. But I reckon if I held onto the gym time and not given the boys the hours they need, I'd have fallen into a much deeper depression hole than I did. The thing that looked like a sacrifice was probably one of the things that kept me out of trouble. My son, Cooper. I'm quietly proud and quietly petrified at the same time. Watching your 19-year-old walk out the door into the real world without me there as his backup, that's tough for any parent. Every parent listening just nodded, I reckon. He's smart, he's capable, he's got good people around him, and he'll be fine. But that petrified bit doesn't go away just because you know he'll be fine. Cars, that's a big one. The hobby that's been a constant with me since the latter days, probably since before the latter days, really. There's a reason a lot of blokes find their way out of the dark through cars, through builds, through clubs, through the bay of a workshop on a Saturday afternoon. It's not the cars exactly, it's having something to focus on that's just yours. The smell of fresh oil, the satisfaction of a stubborn bolt finally letting go. The conversation at a car meet that runs 3 hours longer than you planned. And project cars especially. Like when depression's got you, and if you've been there, you know what I mean. Everything feels heavy. Getting out of bed is hard. Making decisions is hard. The big picture is just too big to look at. But a project car breaks the world down into small problems with tangible solutions. Today I'm chasing a rattle. Today I'm cleaning a carburetor. Today I'm getting one stubborn bolt out of a rusted manifold. Small wins. And the day where everything else feels like you're wadding through concrete, a small win in the shed, something you can point to and say, well, that wasn't done this morning, now it is. That's not nothing. That's the thing that stops you drifting deep into a darker place. It's not a cure, it's just a handhold. And for a lot of blokes, the shed and the project are the handhold that keeps moving forward and nothing else is working. And car culture, like proper car culture, club culture, the people who turn up at a Sunday cruise, rain, hail or shine, it's genuinely one of the brilliant things in this country. If you've got that, protect it. And if you haven't found it yet, go knock on some doors. Which brings me to why I'm doing all of this. The show, the business, Ask Willy. I'm not trying to save anyone, but I do reckon a lot of people are walking around with their own version of what I just described. It could be a loss, a transition, just a quiet period in your life, and a hobby or an interest that gives them a bit of light. If I can help a few people get more out of their version of their car or a version of whatever it is, that's what I'm trying to do. Find your solace, find your adventure, achieve the thing that's going to make you that little bit happier than you were yesterday. That's all it is. So the boys, you've met two of them already. Cooper just now on the petrified bit and Jacob through the 415 alarms. But let me actually introduce them properly. So I've got three boys, three very different humans. Cooper's 19, he's on army gap year, which I reckon is a brilliant decision at his age. He's got his own Amarok and we're slowly building it up together. Recently we did a dual battery system in it, ran the inverter, ran solar with MPPT, wired in a light bar through the factory switches. We started with a problem, like what does he actually need the electrical system to power and for how long, and just work backwards from there. It's a good way to build anything, or at least identify the solution right. Clayton's 15, grade 10 this year. Genuinely, he is a remarkably intelligent kid. He's not into cars, and that's completely fine. 2 out of 3 isn't bad, I suppose. He wants to be an aeronautical engineer. You ask him anything about helicopters or fighter jets, and he'll give you a 30-minute lecture without pausing for breath. He already knows what he wants to do at 15, and I'm genuinely proud of that. And Jacob, he's 12, year 7 this year. He's my feisty one, like a full-blown menace, and probably the most like his old man. Just recently competed at the Queensland State Swimming Championships, and when we're up at the farm, he's the first one who's going to be bashing around the track. He's definitely a car guy. Being an engineer to me has never been like a status thing. It's about having a genuine fascination with how things work, the way that the smallest thing can affect the biggest thing, and just staying curious about the world and everything in it. I want my boys to have that in whatever they end up doing with their lives. The big lap. That was Rochelle and I's pre-COVID plan. Take the family and do a full lap of Australia and see this country properly. By the time the COVID dust had settled, Cooper was finishing year 10, so we had to defer it. And now Clayton's in year 10, so it's going to be deferred for a few more years, but we're going to get out there. And I feel like I've spent a lot of time getting everything prepped to go. Life's the longest thing you get to do. But when you're busy, it can seem very short. And I want to slow it down, meet some locals, stop and have a beer with them, and see the places we're always driving past thinking, we'll stop there one day, but we always end up keep driving. And I want to do it in a rig that I know is right. It's been properly built and properly loaded, and it's been properly certified. Because if I'm the one taking my family to remote country, I'm not going to leave anything to chance. And the work I do every day, it's not abstract to me. Every build I sign off, it's one that's got to get a family home, including mine when it's our turn to go. And that's not a theory, that's the whole point. So that's me, that's the bloke. In part B, I'll tell you what the show's actually going to do and why I think it's worth your time every week. I'll see you over there. Right, Welcome back to Built Right with AJ. If you watched part A, you'll know a bit about me now. If you came straight in here, short version, I'm AJ. I run an engineering practice in Toowoomba called Teams, and this show is built on what I see every week. Part A is in the description if you want the personal stuff. This part, well, we're getting into this show what it's actually for. Quick version of how I ended up doing this, because the path wasn't a straight line. Then I'll tell you how Teams started, why the show exists, and exactly what we're going to do every week. So stick around. I worked on mine sites first, started as a driller's offsider, and if you know what that job involves, you know no one on a mine site works harder or gets yelled at more. Worked my way up, offsider to assistant driller to driller. It was good, honest, hard work. It was outdoors and it was physical. I found out a lot about myself during that time. We hit an extended wet season and I sat around for months without pay, so I thought, geez, there's got to be a more consistent way to pay the bills. Defence had always been a bit of a thing in my family, so I signed up for the army, ended up doing 16 years. Went in as a vehicle mechanic and flew through the trade course because I've been turning spanners for years, but now I just had a piece of paper that said I was officially allowed to. Did heavy vehicle, diesel, the old Parenti Land Rovers and the Mogs, the old portal axles, reduction gearing, beautiful, simple, capable machines. Probably actually my favourite thing to work on. During my time in, the fleet changed from the original legacy fleet to the G-Wagons and the Rheinmetall trucks. They replaced the Mogs. But it was really a genuinely interesting time to be in the army. Watching that transition from old school mechanical robustness to a more complicated system, it wasn't always better for maintenance support, but, you know, we got there. They'd planted something, though. I kept thinking there must be a better way to design this. The engineers designing weren't the ones doing the maintenance. I wanted to be the engineer who'd been under the truck in 40-degree heat trying to reach some fitting some designer had put somewhere completely inaccessible, because once you've been that bloke on the ground fighting that battle, you can't not be him. So I started studying while I was still in full-time, working full-time, studying nights and weekends, had young kids at home, and Rochelle was carrying a hell of a lot through that period and kept everyone together. She was genuinely amazing. Ended up doing UNSW Canberra for 4 years and came out the other end with a mechanical engineering degree. My thesis landed the same year as COVID, actually, and I had the boys at home for 15 weeks. We were trying to keep some sort of normality in their lives and finish off a thesis in an environment that was suddenly very, very restrictive. But we got creative. You know, we got through it. The simulation model I built ended up being used at the UNSW Aircraft Systems Design course for a little while, so that was cool. I have to say good luck to the person that tries to either reverse or re-engineer that, because that was quite a rabbit hole, that bit of software. But what I described, what those three experiences actually gave me in the real world, the degree sort of teaches you how to think through the problems. The trade teaches you how to look at things, how they work in the real world, you know, what it feels like to have it in your hands, what happens when it breaks or why it breaks. And 16 years in the army teaches you that when a system actually fails at the worst possible moment, just how serious those consequences can be. And I think just making sure that the work that you produce is a product of understanding those consequences. I mean, all three of those things together, that's what I like to bring to every engineering assessment that I do. Quick timeline note before I get into this. Teams actually started in mid-2022, a couple of years before I left the army. So everything I just told you about how I got here was happening around it, not before it. But the version of Teams you're now hearing about, well, that's what it became once I had the bandwidth, and frankly the reason to make it what it could be. But taking a couple of steps back to 2022, COVID meant we couldn't leave the country. So Rochelle and I were taking the boys on caravan trips and exploring locally, which was actually brilliant in its own right. But what I saw on the roads really scared me. There were people out with the biggest cars and the biggest vans they could buy, wobbling down the highway and creating real hazards for everyone else around them. Not because they didn't care, it's because they didn't have the information on how to tow properly, how to set up a van for stability, on weight distribution, on what the vehicle was actually rated for versus what they were trying to get away with. And most people don't think about the fact that a braking system on their tow vehicle was designed for a very specific load. And when you operate beyond that load, you're asking it to perform in conditions it was never validated for. And unfortunately, that usually becomes obvious at the worst possible moment. And no one was telling them. So version 1 of Teams was really just about educating people, how to set your rig up so you're not a hazard to yourself or all the people driving down the other side of the road. And it grew from there through building our own touring rig, the Amarok. I walked the exact same path most people walk. The uncertainty, the misinformation, the contradictory advice from shops and forums. And mates had all done something similar. But every time I went looking for a straight answer on what was actually legal and what wasn't, I got a different answer. Sometimes confident answers that turned out to be completely wrong. And I'm an engineer, you know, I know how to find the source documents and read the standards and not someone's interpretation of a story they heard once. You know, and I was still getting confused. So I thought, what chance does the average bloke have? And the answer was, not a great one, unless someone builds something better. So that's what I set out to do. All right, so that's the why of the whole thing. Now let me tell you what we're actually going to do here. This show, Built Right, is exactly what it sounds like. Building things properly. Doing it once and doing it right, instead of 3 times badly while you bleed money. Now I run teams out of Toowoomba, Total Engineering and Modification Solutions. A big part of what I do is sign off on vehicle modifications and inspect builds. I see what goes right, I see what goes wrong. And here's the part that gets me. Most of what goes wrong is completely avoidable. The frustrating bit for the owner and for me is that the problem was usually a conversation that didn't happen, a question that didn't get asked, a mate's advice that wasn't quite right, a solution that got bought before the problem got defined. I'd rather talk you out of the wrong modification than see you build something that's a waste of your money and doesn't actually tick any of the boxes you need it to. I would rather you spend a half hour with Ask Willy and decide you don't actually need anything than watch you follow forum advice to answer someone else's problem. We're going to go deep and try to be objective because I'm not in the parts selling business. I want to have real conversations, the kind you have when no one is in a hurry and you actually want to understand a thing, not just at surface level, the whole thing. This isn't a four-wheel drive show. It's not a touring show. It's not just a performance car show either. It's all of them. The four-wheel driving touring stuff is definitely a big slice of what lands on my inspection list and comes through Ask Willy. So it'll definitely be a big slice of what we cover. You know, GVM, suspension, lifts, towing capacity, the weight math no one does. But the engineering thinking applies to everything with wheels, every modification, every build, every time. So we'll talk about performance modifications too. Forced induction, exhaust systems, ECU tunes, the line between what's legal and what's not, because a lot of people are on the wrong side of that line and don't know it until an inspector or an insurer tells them. We'll also talk about classic cars and resto mods, engine swaps, brake conversions, what the compliance pathway actually looks like when you're putting a modern engine into an old body, why the answer's different depending on when the car was built. And we'll talk about the new frontier, EV conversions, ripping the petrol out and putting batteries in. There are new rules, new standards, and almost no one's explaining them in plain language. 4 corners of the same world, 4-wheel drives, performance cars, classics, EVs. The principles don't change, the questions don't change, only the answers do. If you turn up here looking for 40 minutes of cheerleading about your specific build, it's the wrong show. I'll ask questions. What's the actual problem you're trying to solve? Because 9 times out of 10, the answers changes what we do next. That's the deal, and that's the show. Every single week, I'll see the same thing. It's almost a rolling theme now, either through the Ask Willy client intake or just rolling up to an inspection at someone's place. A build that's already done, good components, real money's been spent, months of planning, months of forum reading, and somewhere in that build, usually in more than one place, there's a decision that's been made, and it made sense on paper, sounded right from a mate who's done something similar, but didn't account for how the vehicle works as a system. And now they've got a problem. The frustrating part for them and for me is the problem was almost always avoidable. The conversation up front, the right questions before the money was spent. That's all it would have taken. And here's the thing about engineering. Strip back. It's not all about the calcs. The calcs are the easy bit. Engineering is about the order of operations, defining the problem, understanding the system, identifying what changes when you change one thing, then and only then pick a solution. Most builds skip step 1 entirely. They start at the solution. You know, I want a 3-inch lift, or I want 35s, or I need to put a bigger turbo on. But none of these are actually problems. They're solutions. But if you don't know what problem you're trying to solve, you can't tell whether the solution actually solved it. So that's the conversation we have on the show. Start with the problem, look at what would actually solve it, and look at what that decision costs you everywhere else in your system. Because every decision costs you somewhere. That's just the physics. Then we work out whether the trade-off is worth it for the way you actually use the vehicle. It's not complicated. It just takes a bit of patience, and it could save you a hell of a lot of money. Now, it's important to talk about the single thing that costs people more money than just about anything else, the honest use case. I'll roll up to a job and there's a full drive sitting there that looks like it could ford the Murray on its own. Lockers front and back, 35s on bead locks, long range tanks, straws, compressor, awning, recovery gear that would resupply a small army, a fancy stainless snorkel up the A-pillar, a roof rack with everything on it. And I asked the owner, what do you actually use the vehicle for? The school run, 5 days a week, parking on the grass at the kids' rugby games when the car park's over full, maybe a weekend on the beach in October, camping trip to national parks a couple of times a year, maybe run up the Bunya Mountains for a Sunday lunch. See, that's not an engineering build, that's a fantasy build. And look, there's nothing wrong with it. People are allowed to enjoy their vehicles. People are allowed to dream a bit. And I get it, I'm a car guy too. But let's be honest about what it is and what it actually costs you. The cost of a fantasy build isn't just dollars. It's the daily driving experience you sacrifice every single time you drive that car. The fuel bill that goes up 40%, the tyre wear, the brake wear from carrying 400 extra kilos of gear you'll use maybe twice a year, the compromised highway manners, the roof rack noise on every trip to the shops. The honest build, the one that fits your actual most extreme legitimate use case, is almost always cheaper. almost always more comfortable, almost always as capable, just when you actually do go and use it for what you need it for, because you sized it for what you actually do, not what you wished you did. It's the same trap existing in every type of category though. Track spec coilovers on a daily that goes to the track once or twice a year. A lumpy cammed V8 sports car bought for the noise that gets driven to work in stop-start traffic every morning. A caravan rated for extreme outback touring that does their pilgrimage to the sunny coast, on sealed roads twice a year. None of these choices are wrong in isolation. None of them are the cheapest, most capable, most enjoyable answer to the actual question being asked. Define the problem honestly and then build for the answer. Now, here's a practical example because this is one that catches a lot of people out. The number one reason people come to me wanting a lift is they think they need more ground clearance. But ground clearance, articulation, and body clearance are three completely separate problems, and they've got three completely different solutions. Need more ground clearance? Start with tyres. A bigger tyre diameter gives you ground clearance without touching the suspension geometry at all. Simple, cheap, and for a lot of people, that's all you need. No modification needed. Need more articulation for serious off-road work? Well, now we're talking suspension, springs, shocks, the whole system, because that's what changes articulation. Bigger tyres don't give you articulation, they give you clearance. Need more body clearance, say to fit a tray or clear a bigger set of tyres at full lock? Well, that's a body lift conversation. A body lift raises the body relative to the chassis without touching the suspension geometry or centre of gravity the way the suspension does. Three different problems, three different solutions. Confusing them or trying to solve all three with one mod that only partially addresses each? Well, that's where builds go wrong, and that's where money gets wasted. Be honest about what you actually need. Get a solution that fits the problem and spend less doing it. Here's how most builds actually start. Bloke wants to lift his four-wheel drive, goes to a forum says 3-inch lift, monotube shocks, 2-inch body blocks, 35-inch tyres, everyone's done it, looks great, goes great, bulletproof. He goes to a shop, the shop sells him exactly that. No questions asked. I mean, why would they? It's a sale, right? 3 months later, this bloke's wondering why the vehicle wanders on the highway, why the steering doesn't return to centre the way it used to, why the tyres are wearing unevenly, why is his mechanic mate telling him there's something that just doesn't feel right. Those symptoms, the highway wander, the poor steering return, the uneven wear, they're classic signs of caster change. Lift a vehicle without correcting the caster angle and you've changed the geometry of the manufacturer designed into the suspension. The vehicle will respond accordingly. It's not always dramatic, it can be really subtle, but it builds over time and it matters. That lift setup might be completely appropriate for some vehicles and some use cases. I'm not saying that the parts are wrong, but how do you know if no one's asked the right questions first? What do you actually use the vehicle for? Is it a daily that occasionally sees a dirt road? Do you tow? And if so, how much and what? How often are you generally off-road and what sort of terrain? What's your actual payload, on a loaded trip? The answers decide what you actually need, and what you actually need might be completely different to what's popular on forums. Not knocking forums though, I mean they're a great source of information, but the problem is that the question that's being answered isn't your question. An engineer asks those questions, and that's the difference, and that's what this show does, and I want to help you do that. Cast the critical engineer's eye on your own build. This is probably the single most valuable lesson that people learn. Unfortunately, sometimes it's done the hard way. It's the conversation up front with someone who actually understands the vehicle as a system. It costs less than the regret. Every single time, I've never seen it go the other way. The most common version of this story is bloke spends, say, $50,000 building up a rig over a 12-month period. Books the inspection at the end because, he wants it certified. And on the inspection day, I'm walking around his rig telling him there's 3 or 4 things that he's done that doesn't comply. Can't be certified as they are, and they need to either be partially done or completely redone. And you can see at the moment it lands. He's looking at me like I've personally ruined his life. But I haven't. The build did. Or more specifically, the build sequence did. The build didn't have an engineering eye from the start. If we'd had a 45-minute conversation before we ordered the parts, through Ask Willy, through an engineering engagement, it doesn't matter how, we'd have flagged the problems before the money was spent. He'd have certified on the first go and never thought about it again. Instead, he's pulling off components off a finished build, paying twice for the same labour, waiting 6 weeks for the right parts that he should have ordered the first time. It's not because the rules are unreasonable. The rules are mostly reasonable, and for the most parts, they make sense. It's because the order of operations was wrong. Get the engineering eye on the build before you spend the money, not after. The conversation is cheap. Sometimes it's free. The regret can be expensive. Now, I've learned a fair bit of stuff in my 50 years, but I'd be an absolute knucklehead if I pretended that I know everything. And anyone that tells you they do is probably the last person you should be listening to. So part of what I want to do on this show is bring on people who live and breathe in specific corners of our world. The suspension specialist who can tell you why one set of shocks and springs works on one chassis but not on another, and how to read a vehicle to know what it actually needs. The engine builder who's done 100 engine swaps and can tell you where builds fail the compliance test. and what you should be asking before you pull the original motor. The forced induction specialist who's seen what way too much boost does to a stock bottom end, and what good boost control actually looks like when it's done properly. The brake engineer who can explain why bigger discs aren't always the upgrade they look like, and what actually changes when you go from drums to disc on an old car. The emissions and tuning specialist who can tell you where the legal line sits on a remap, and what happens when you cross it, because a lot of people are about to find out the hard way. The EV conversion builder who's navigating the new standards, ADR compliance on a battery system, the engineering that sits behind it, and the pathway, how it actually looks from start to registration. The electrical fit-out installer who's wired up 1,000 touring rigs and can tell you what decisions cost you in the long term, and how to set up your rig so it's future-proof. These are the people I want to put in front of you, so you can hear them talk straight, in their own words, about the things they do every day. Long-form, deep conversations that don't fit into a 30-second reel. That's what the show is. So that's a wrap for the show for this week, guys. If you watched part A, you'll have heard me say that cars for me were a happy place, a way of getting myself out of a hole at times. If you've got something that does that for you, a build, a club, a Sunday cruise, a bay in the workshop, just protect it. If you haven't found yours yet, this is one place to start looking. Now, I'm trying to grow a business, and I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't. But the philosophy hasn't changed since version 1 of Teams. If I give you the right information and you make a better decision, that's a better outcome for everyone. If you become the kind of person who values doing things properly, well, you might end up working with me one day. Or you might not. Either way, you'll have a better rig and you'll know why. That's the deal. If anything in this episode's connected with you, head across to totalengineeringmods.com.au and have a free chat with Ask Willy. It's free, he'll give you straight answers, it's where it all starts. He'll get you going in the right direction. I'll be back next week with episode 1, GVM, the most important number on your vehicle, and the one most owners don't actually know. We're going to go deep on it. The 5 numbers, the traps, the upgrade pathways, and the towing wall no one tells you about. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And hey guys, take it easy out there.